This episode of the Yesterworld podcast is in part sponsored by all of my amazing patrons. And if you want to help support the making of future content, please check out my Patreon and shop in the description below. And if you enjoy the video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Yesterworld podcast. Today joining us is another theme park content creator, Jack from Park Ride History. How's it going, Jack?
It's going great.
Thanks for coming on. I've been wanting to get you on for a little bit, so this is a nice little treat.
Any chance to ramble about theme parks, I take it. I'm there. Don't worry.
No, same here. So one thing I thought we could start off with, because you and I both recently did some videos about having to do with the Haunted Mansion. And for anyone who hasn't seen your recent video exploring the movie adaptation of the Haunted Mansion, I thought you could just kind of surmise or summarize what your thoughts are of the movie, negative and positive, and then we can just kind of talk about that, because I feel like perception has maybe changed of the movie since when it first came out versus now that we've had, 20 pirate movies and and all that.
Yeah, in terms of people not seeing that video, I think that'd be the majority. Please, guys, you need to watch. You need to vary up the content. I can't just be talking about rides all the time. Anyway, it was basically that video started out as more focused on just ride-based movies in general, because I wasn't very confident with how much material there was on the Haunted Mansion. And then I found out about the various revisions, because like I said in the video, I think there were a total of 3 different scripts. Mm-hmm. One was Jim Hill, who, is surprising to me, the actual Jim Hill that we know in the kind of Disney community.
And I had no idea. No idea about that.
I'm like, this has got to be quite a coincidence. And I just emailed him and he's like, yeah. And people in the comments were like, I was ready to jump all over you for that not being correct.
Right.
Like, oh, yeah, that was weird. So there was that one, and then that was going to be more of a TV movie, kind of like in the vein of Tower of Terror, which was not a very artistic movie, but still did its job. And so that ended up getting canned after Hocus Pocus, which was not the best. And fast forward, to pretty much early 2000s, when they were doing a bunch of ride-based movies that
right.
Country Bears, Pirates. Yeah. They threw this one out, and it's everything you'd expect. Eddie Murphy in a haunted house.
I think that's the best. I imagine that's how the pitch meeting went. It's like, all right,
Probably.
Guys, Eddie Murphy in the haunted house, and they're just like, sold.
Well, like I said in the second one, where it was already, I don't know if they had Eddie Murphy confirmed for it yet, but it was kind of more of a real character as opposed to, like you said, Eddie Murphy playing Eddie Murphy.
To me, and I mentioned it in your video, I think that was the biggest flaw, because you had Johnny Depp playing Jack Sparrow, and of course he did, he was well known, but he wasn't like a superstar at that point. I barely knew who he was. I'd seen a few of his movies, but he hadn't had any huge movies at that point. Maybe Edward Scissorhands and of course 21 Jump Street, but I think for the mainstream audiences, they didn't really know much about him. And so even though, he took it and made his own character, and he had a lot of leverage with it, Eddie Murphy, I think, came in and, he was already so famous and he wasn't known for playing characters. And so I think that's the biggest problem of the movie, is that it's just Eddie Murphy playing Eddie Murphy. And you can tell that from a writing perspective, they wrote it around that versus just writing it as a really great screenplay, where just like Pirates of the Caribbean, and then Johnny Depp took the character and kind of made it his own. It just seemed very one note from the beginning as far as how it would revolve around him versus Jack Sparrow and Johnny Depp.
Yeah, I have to wonder if it was more so, because obviously with Pirates, and we know this because they're very transparent about that movie because it was so successful, that it was a character that was written and then was able to get the Johnny Depp twist that we all know, because that's what he could play, and that was the different kind of variation of that character. We don't have the script or any of the ones that I talked about in the video. We just know about the early revisions from word of mouth. And I have to wonder if it was the same. If it was, we have a character, let's let Eddie Murphy give his own twist because we know that's what he can do, and add his own comedy stylings, or if it was literally just, hey, this is Eddie Murphy, and by the way, your name is Jim Evers in this movie that you're making.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what it was, and because there's positive, I think it's easy to tear apart a movie like Haunted Mansion because it was so utterly disappointing, but I think it got some things right. It had some good production value. It had some really great set design, and I think one of the biggest problems was setting it in the modern world. It's like it starts out and you're not interested. You're like this, it takes place. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I know it's like they're in this, nice house and it's super modern.
Yeah.
And although the very, very beginning starts out in the past, right? Like
yeah, the kind of opening sequence is kind of dreamlike, but it's very
right.
Yeah, it's that old century when Gracie was still alive.
And I think had they stayed with that, even if Eddie Murphy somehow was shoehorned into, I don't know how that would have worked, but if they just stayed with a period piece, kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, it would have just been that much better because you would have been more immersed into the world versus always in the back of your mind being like, oh, this is just inside a mansion that's in the modern world. None of this is, it just had a really weird feeling, I remember, from the times I watched it, that you never really felt immersed into anything,
Yeah,
which is what Pirates did well.
I could kind of suspend that disbelief and be like, oh, okay, well, that's just the way it is. It's taking place in this mansion. The only thing that's really jarring is, hey, by the way, Eddie Murphy. I think they might have, and I'm questioning whether or not, if they would have done better had they just made it focused on telling that story that they only did flashbacks of in the opening sequence between, like, we have to, like, find it out through this mystery, but it's like, I don't care about the protagonist. I don't care about Eddie Murphy. I don't care if he figures it out. Who cares about anything? The whole thing is just a exercise in nihilism.
And as an audience, you pretty much like 20 minutes, 30 minutes in, you already kind of have it all figured out. So then there's no mystery revelation really. You can kind of put the pieces together before anyone else does, which is kind of a big no-no in, writing.
I just, yeah, it would have been much better. I'm going to go with fact it would have been much better had they just focused on that story. Because at least there was, like I said, real performances with
right.
that. That's where the real actors and actresses were. It was in that. It wasn't with Eddie Murphy or the kids or
yeah.
even the Ezra and Emma, which were the two
right.
side characters. The two, yeah. I felt nothing with any of those, and that was unfortunately a majority of the movie.
Yeah, but I do remember actually feeling for Master Gracie and his character and his plight, I guess you could say, that whole scenario. Whereas, like you said, Eddie Murphy and the kids and all that stuff just didn't work. But I do think having cast Eddie Murphy, and it would be really curious to know if they encouraged him to make a character or if from the very beginning it was just plopping, Eddie Murphy in and not, like if it was a conscious decision or if they left it up to him or, however it ended up being, because you just... In my opinion, because I understand there are a lot of people who like the movie, and I think there is stuff to like, and I can enjoy it and put on my nostalgia goggles and and just enjoy the fact that it's a Disney attraction kind of brought to life. But I think they gave him just too much leniency with the script, and you can tell a lot of it's got to be improv. Especially at that dinner table scene.
Yeah,
I would imagine. I'm assuming
most of it was because I don't know. I didn't use very much of the behind the scenes footage. I kind of cut away to some B-roll, and it's just like, here's probably how the script looked. Okay, Eddie Murphy drives up, gets out of the car, and then improvise.
Right.
Every take would be completely different, and they just ended up with something. And I have to praise the editors who managed to make a movie out of that because it is a decent movie, just not very entertaining.
And I think he was also, and not to blame Eddie Murphy, I think he was just very miscast for that kind of movie. It's, you don't want to get, it'd be like if Jack Sparrow had went into scene and was just monologue. Well, I guess that's probably a bad argument because he does that, but I don't know. It fits with the world and the character versus just random improv. I guess that doesn't really have to do with a character. It's more just Eddie Murphy improving, if that makes sense. It's not like
Well,
tied to anything necessarily.
yeah, well, that's another part of that why it was kind of terrible, and it's what you said earlier. It was that it was very much based in reality, and you've kind of got unrealistic things happening. And I think Guillermo del Toro, who wrote the new one, or still I guess is in the process of writing the new one. I said he put the script out, but people are like, "Oh no, he's still working on it." I'm like, "Oh okay." Anyway, he said that one's more of a kind of heightened reality, where
Right.
it's not so unrealistic that there's literal ghosts, because that would obviously be a very odd shock to just a regular Eddie Murphy type character selling real estate that goes surreal.
But it does
Well,
have, moments, like I've said. It's not like a terrible movie. It's, I've seen much worse. I think if I remember right, I haven't seen it in forever, but I think Country Bear Jamboree was probably a much worse from my recollection when it
oh
first
yeah,
came out.
yeah, you're not wrong.
So they got the because they I think they did a good job with the atmosphere, and I don't know. It's just I don't think it deserves as much of the hate as it does, but it's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. But I can watch it and appreciate aspects of it. But maybe I'm just trying to sometimes you try to find the best in something even when it's not necessarily there.
Oh
But
yeah.
but I think there is joy to be had. So what? Because I haven't actually looked up anything about it in recent years, but what's like the latest news with Guillermo del Toro? Because I feel like that rumor's been going around for a long time. Like Ryan Gosling was I think attached at one point.
Yeah, he was supposed to be attached, but we never had that confirmed. The only thing that is confirmed is the fact that he wrote a script and is said to be producing it, and that's it. That I mean, literally, it's just everything I said in the video is pretty much all we know. It's like the little footer at the end of a Wikipedia article. So it's very much up in the air, and like I said, it's been so long since that news broke that oh hey, Haunted Mansion movie, and
Right.
I have to assume they're waiting on just letting other things kind of run their course. Like I think there's going to be another Pirates movie to see how that goes before we take some kind of gamble. Like they're in no rush. It's not like
Right.
Haunted Mansion is some hot IP. We got to throw this one out there. So they'll take
And
their time.
and that's what I think is interesting. When I don't remember if I made the comment in your video or if I just had it because I originally had a much longer script and I was like, no, I need to kind of compress it a bit. But the fact that in a way, what happened with some aspect, I think all of the Pirates movies have good and bad. Some are better than others, but I don't think any of them are like absolute garbage, or anything like that. But kind of like with Eddie Murphy, I think they gave Johnny Depp way too much leverage with not just the script, but or maybe just they gave too much leverage with the writers in terms of zany situations to put, Jack Sparrow in because now he's this huge thing. So then
Yeah.
it's like, whereas before, yeah, he stole the movie, but that was not the whole point. Whereas I feel like now they're written. I haven't seen the last one, so I heard they kind of pulled back on this a bit. But it's not like the movie revolves around Jack Sparrow's zany situations. What's he going to get into next, kind of thing, which is what I think the misdirection it started to take after the second movie.
Yeah, they completely missed the point of Jack Sparrow as a character, and I'm in love with that whole series of movies, that whole franchise, whatever you want to call it. So I'm very well versed. I've seen them a lot of times, and it's just a complete mess by everything post three, because that's when they started bringing on new directors, and everything just went completely sideways. I think a big problem was that Jack Sparrow in the first one and then the other two or two and three because those were kind of a separate story.
Mm-hmm.
He in those movies is just a guy who is trying to get around that situation. Like that explains pretty much everything you need to know about the character of Jack Sparrow. He's always plotting something, but he kind of masks it in this kind of I have no idea what I'm doing, and that's what the gag is between. Oh, that's got to be the worst pirate I've ever seen. Right after
Mm-hmm.
he pulls something some amazing feat. He's always planning something. So he's navigating around, oh, Davy Jones and the Kraken are coming to get me, or Barbossa and all this. That's what the whole thing was. But instead, they took that at face value in the fourth and fifth movie as, oh, he's just a wacky character who always ends up getting out. No, he's like a smart guy who mastered in that, so everybody underestimates him. So I think that's another big problem with the character of Jack Sparrow. Not even just Johnny Depp. People who wrote him didn't understand that's what was happening in the first three.
Yeah, and I think that's just the problem, really, with any movie where you have a character that's like, kind of steals the show, and then the writers tend to, and I'm sure it's the studio, not to blame the writers themselves. I'm sure a lot of the time it's the studio saying, all right, we need to sell more toys, we need to sell more of this, put him in this zany situation, we can make that as part of a video game or as part of a something, and it just got a little over the top. And so I'm curious to watch the new one. I just haven't gotten around to it.
I'll give it a nice strong recommendation on doing that. I like it more than 4. 4 was only better because it had a younger Jack Sparrow, so it kind of got a little bit more of that magic right that they had in 2, 3, and 1. But 5 completely ditched that, and they kind of went in a new direction, but still really banking on that. And like you said, it does have all those new characters, which end up getting a lot of the spotlight in that movie.
Do you think that, in your opinion, do you feel that the Haunted Mansion could be a franchisable series if done right, or do you think it's a very one-off kind of basis for a movie?
I think it's pretty done, because like that's just a difference in the way the rides are structured. Here's the only way that Haunted Mansion could be kind of stretched out into a series of films or anything like that.
And I mean based off not based off the Eddie Murphy.
Oh, yeah,
based off a new one, could it be franchised?
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
It would definitely have to be focusing on like all those different characters and telling their stories, like every animatronic you see, because that's kind of the magic of Pirates, is that it's not like, oh, here's this story we're telling you. That's what happens at Haunted Mansion. Here's this story. And Pirates is it's a big mishmash of all these different characters coming together, and they're doing something. I'm talking about the ride here. Like every single one of those guys that you see ransacking that town, they probably have a story. They probably do. And,
right.
And so that's what the movie was based on. There are pirates and they do things, and that's it. Haunted Mansion was more so based on what are these mysterious aspects of the ride? Like, why is that guy hanging there? What's up with the bride character in the attic? Like, what does all this stuff mean? Oh, let's make a story around it. So it would have to be more focused on, here's one movie, it's focusing on the bride character. Here's one movie, it's focusing on this guy who hung himself. If you wanted to stretch it out, which I am completely opposed to. I really hate the fact that everything needs to be a franchise now. Just make a movie, please.
Right. Well, that's the problem, because, I mean, I'm sure in the back of their minds they had it, but I didn't personally feel that the first Pirates was written as the first of a series.
No, it was done.
It had potential, but it was very self-contained, very satisfying. And I feel like that's the problem with a lot of movies just in general. Whenever there is an original movie, they want to franchise it, so they leave it, the third act not never, but oftentimes the third act doesn't have the closure that it should, because they want to leave it open-ended, with characters like, oh, they could go on. But I think if done right, if taken seriously, if not done in the modern age, I think the only way you could, I wouldn't even want it that way, but I think the only way it could work in the modern times, if it was almost like a Princess Bride kind of thing, like telling the story, occasionally flashing forward, but I'm not a huge fan of that kind of story structure. But I think that's the only way you could or should put in the modern world if they were to do a Haunted Mansion movie, and it should more or less all be in the past, just telling focusing on telling a really good story. And that's another problem of the Haunted Mansion, I felt, is it was too focused on how many references we can get in here,
Yes.
And they weren't organic they were just very, hey, remember this? You saw this on the ride. It's like, it didn't flow at all.
No. Yeah, and that's another thing you said. You said it in Pirates, both the ride and the film, all those references were so, like, I was going to make a video, and I still might, so I don't know, about all the ride references they have in Pirates, and they're so hard to catch all of them because
Mm-hmm.
they're so slight. There's no attention being brought to it. After I uploaded that video where you mentioned that, where it's like, oh yeah, the ride, it's all these references. I was focused on one thing in that scene, like I thought it was completely unrelated, and I look, oh, there's a reference to the thing that's completely uncatchable unless you're continually looking at it. So all those slight little nods are really good, and there's not one slight nod in Haunted Mansion. All of them are so in your face. It's a little bit
Right.
comical at points.
I'd be curious to watch it again because I'd focused before on aspects of the Haunted Mansion, like the Hatbox Ghost. But for my Evolution one, it was the first time I really dug into the history. But I'd be curious to watch the new Haunted Mansion and see if there are any more subtle references that are like, oh, or if every single one is just very blatant, even if it's like a background thing.
The only ones that I thought were really kind of sly and I appreciated were ones that were like the fact, and it's not even really a reference. It's just the fact that it's kind of architecturally based on the
Mm-hmm.
attraction. Like you'll notice all types of things are very similar. Like even just chairs and the way certain things are furnished. I appreciated those because it does set the tone for the movie that you're watching, and it also is like, oh hey, by the way, the ride, but not going, oh, this is an exact line of dialogue you heard in the ride. Let me just shoehorn it
Right.
right up in here. That was terrible.
I think, yeah, if you were to summarize the problems, it would be Eddie Murphy, the shoehorned references, and being set in the modern era. Which of those are the worst of the sins committed in terms of filmmaking? I'm not sure, but they all kind of led into each other. It's not like they're separate. The modern aspect had to do with Eddie Murphy's performance, and then the shoehorn stuff had to do with they're kind of connected in that way.
Well, if we're lucky, the new one isn't going to have any of those problems, at least from what we know. So we'll get to see a movie if it can stand on its own, or if the first Haunted Mansion would have been good without those. Who knows?
And I think that it would actually help the movie to have a lesser budget because I have this kind of belief that there are some movies, of course, that they need the budget. A movie like Gravity, that movie needed the budget to create the photorealistic CGI. But I think a lot of times when you have a moderate amount of constraint on the budget, it forces you to be more creative, to kind of trim the fat of what you don't need in the movie, scenes
Yeah.
that maybe they're really cool, but you don't really need them. So if it's given a decent, healthy budget that's not too much, not too little, and a director like Guillermo del Toro, who is very good at blending practical effects and CGI, and he's a very grounded filmmaker. Um, that's where I think it could do really well. The problem is that Disney's, I think, more focused on they have a lot more they have a lot more going on right now. Like you kind of mentioned earlier with Marvel and Star Wars and Pirates that I don't know. I'm not sure when it would be made, or if I don't know. Maybe they'll just give someone a less small budget and say, okay, here you go.
Just relate. It'll probably be one of those movies that like it comes out under a completely different name and like it's got a small director attached to it. It's under one of Disney's like one of the things they bought out, and then it'll be like 20 years from then they'll be like, oh hey, by the way, did you know that this was originally written by Guillermo del Toro? It was going to be the Haunted Mansion movie, and then they didn't do anything with it, and eventually they just last minute made it because they were going to lose the rights or whatever. I have a feeling that's probably what's going to happen with it because I mean, why would they even bother with something small now? They've got
Right.
their hands full with so much like big budget, insanely like guaranteed to be popular movies. That would be a complete waste of time for them. I think they should do it, but they would not do it. So
Yeah, I think the other problem is that the name's kind of tarnished in a way, whereas if you'd had a really terrible Pirates of the Caribbean movie and then you tried to redo it, I think it would still kind of stick in people's minds. Whereas, luckily they didn't have that problem because the first one was really good. But with Haunted Mansion, they I don't know, not like a new name or anything, but just I think they'd have to find some way to disassociate from the original, or maybe enough time has passed that people don't remember it as much.
I don't know. Maybe people would be forgiving because, like I said, that movie is terrible, but it's not the same level of terrible as Country Bears, where nobody even like nostalgically remembers it fondly. Everyone just straight up hates that movie. I think people kind of like the Haunted Mansion, so if you decided to give it another shot, I know I'd watch it. I know plenty of people would probably watch it just to see like what are you gonna do? And people love that ride, so anything
Right.
based on that ride's gonna get eaten up. I mean, you've seen how fast those Funko Pop figures get sold when they have a Haunted Mansion character on them. So
Yeah, maybe just a title that, I don't know, something that has to do with the Haunted Mansion, or maybe it'd be cool if they went back to the original development and found a name to use that would be like a throwback to the Haunted Mansion. And I think that'd be another thing, that rather than just focus the entire movie on the Haunted Mansion we got, would be to go back and, because there was just so much that didn't end up in the Haunted Mansion, characters and stories. And so I think there's a lot of material that didn't make it into the ride that could be used for the movie that would be fun, rather than just, because that's the other problem, was Pirates had a lot more going on.
yeah, the mansion was like the character, and I think that's the most unfortunate thing about it because I didn't really go into detail on it, but from what I skimmed through, and you can actually read the Jim Hill script. It's all online. I looked through it, and it was very much. It had like the only thing it had to do with the Haunted Mansion was that character, the captain character that came from development, and then that was pretty much it. It wasn't like the mansion. The Haunted Mansion, the 2003 one that we got, was so focused on banking on the fact that it's the Haunted Mansion, and we
Right.
really want everyone to get in there. If they just made a movie and they called it like Bloodmere Manor or whatever the original name was for the actual Haunted Mansion, not the attraction, but the mansion itself, if they called it that and they had really no connections aside from some very slight little nods, like not even like references to the actual ride, but very tiny little nods, and that movie did well, that would be so great because that's pretty much what Pirates did. I mean, the entirety of the ride is condensed into one scene in the first Pirates, and it's that kind of town invasion
Right.
at the beginning. That's it. It had nothing else to do. It was its own thing.
Yeah, and the other problem too that I hadn't thought about until this conversation is kind of like what you said, where like Gibbs, or on the ride, I'm trying. Is he actually named Gibbs on the ride, or did they give him that name for the movie?
No, I mean that
Trying to
that
remember.
character is not even supposed to be like if you go on the ride, it looks completely different, and that's one of those tiny little nods. And they actually they do it a few times throughout all the movies. There's someone laying with the pigs, and they throw something on him to wake him up. Like that happens multiple times. So things are not even that implicit. But had that been something like in the Haunted Mansion movie, it would have been right in your face. That That's
Right.
exactly what that's supposed to be.
And that's what I mean, because there's more interpretation there, and they're not characters. It's like you see pirates doing plundering and all that stuff, but it's not a very specific character. Whereas Haunted Mansion, that's the problem, and that's just inherent with the way the ride's designed, is that you don't see, like, the only example of like an average character that wouldn't feel like a weird shoehorn reference is the under, or the caretaker, because he's just a guy with his dog. It's a very
Yeah.
generic, versus the second you have the Hatbox Ghost in a movie, it's there's no interpretation. That is the Hatbox Ghost. Whereas a caretaker, there's more leniency with that. And with Pirates of the Caribbean, the entire ride, I feel like that's another reason why it helped, is that most, except maybe Blackbeard, but for the most part, they're they're not so specific that you can't take them and make them into a new character. You know what I mean? Like Hatbox Ghost, you really can't do all that much with that, other than making him, I think, the literal representation of himself from the ride. Whereas
Yeah.
Pirates, you have all that. It's not so, they're not really characters. They're just embodiments of people during that time period. Pirates during that time period.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I didn't even think of that because that makes perfect sense. There are very few like specific characters on Pirates, and like they said, they had Like there's whatever number of pirates there are in the actual ride. I can't remember the actual one, but they only had like half of those for the face molds. So they couldn't really bring any attention to any real pirate, or else you'd be going, isn't that the same guy we saw from back there? So yeah, they are just kind of faceless people, and that really can be kind of molded into whatever you want in a movie. Any of those pirates could be, the whatever side characters you see in the back of a scene in the movie, because whatever.
I think the only, and again, I didn't mind it because there was so much more going on. The only reference I would say you could count as shoehorned in Pirates, the first one, is the prison scene with the dog. But I just love the way they did it. It's like, I forget the exact word, but it's like, you're never going to get that dog, to come.
Yeah.
And it's just those that know the ride are like, oh, yeah, it's funny because the dog has, it's an animatronic. It's not going to do anything. But even if you're not familiar with the ride, the joke's still funny because, I don't know, just the fact that they're trying so hard to get that dog to come. But that's the only one I would say could be, said, oh, shoot, because it's very specific as from that ride. But I didn't mind it because I thought it blended in with what was going on. They didn't pull you away from the movie and be like, oh, here are the guys from the jail scene. It had to do with the plot,
Yeah, and I don't know, if you watch The Haunted Mansion, which, like I said, I strongly recommend everybody watch The Haunted Mansion for Halloween. It's great Halloween film. There's so many where you're going like, I mean, obviously we all know, hopefully we know, as Disney fans, that obviously that's a reference to the mansion. But even just to a regular person watching that without any affiliation, they're like, is that a reference to something? It just seems really weird. Makes no sense.
I'd be curious to have someone who has no knowledge of the Haunted Mansion watch it and then get their opinions and on the references specifically, and be like, oh, did anything feel weird? Because obviously when you're fans of the ride, you're going to have a different experience. And there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying the movie for the fact of seeing your favorite aspects of the ride brought to life in a movie. That I totally understand, and I can even appreciate that. It's like a guilty pleasure aspect for me.
Yeah, I like I said, it is kind of fun to watch and be like, oh, that's the thing, but it ain't as fun as watching Pirates because all those are just so like under the radar.
Right.
But there are still a few that could be like, oh, is that like a reference to because a lot of the same stuff that was in the very, very early version of the script that ended up getting moved into the final movie. So you have to wonder, is like, was that something that was transferred and they just didn't know that was a reference, so they didn't bring any attention to it? Like the fact that the mansion kind of is in this swamp, like very, very early, and I'm sure you know this, very early in the design process for Haunted Mansion, when they wanted to make it into a ride because the walkthrough wasn't going to work. This was prior to the Omnimover, a word I always have trouble with. The Omnimover, they were like, we got to get people through this, and we just don't know how. So let's make it a boat ride. We're going to flood the whole mansion, and it was kind of this swampy thing. And then in the movie, it's once again, it's this kind of very sunken down into the earth, decrepit mansion. And even the crypt scene where that's kind of half flooded because of all the rain.
I actually didn't know that. I didn't know there was a like a step between, it being a walkthrough and then it becoming the Omnimover vehicle system. But that's interesting. And that's one thing that I think is really fun about the ride is that in going on Haunted Mansion, you can still see a lot of aspects of maybe some of the elements of the Museum of the Weird, the, restaurant companion that didn't work out. And you can see some elements of that when it was going to be like a haunted house. And so that's what I really like about the attraction is it has so much history that there's, it's like a mishmash of all the different ideas that, because it took so long to, make from origin to when it actually opened.
Yeah, I think that ride exists for the sole purpose of making so everybody can make a new Haunted Mansion video every year, because literally even if you can make an hour-long video and you still will not make a dent. Great website. Got to give a shout out. I forgot. I don't know why I'm giving a shout out to a website I can't remember, but literally every page you go on is probably a video's worth of stuff, and it's on some little like throwaway thing that you wouldn't even think of, like the boat ride concept or like a character that wasn't even in the final ride. So you really just go nuts. I'm sure I'll find it by the end of this and I can say it, but
Well, the one I found, or the site, well, two sites, and obviously everyone knows doombuggies.com. That
yeah.
was really helpful. And then the other one was Dan Olson's The Long Forgotten Haunted
Yes.
Mansion blog.
There we go. Those are the two.
So if
Yeah,
anyone
that's-
hasn't, it's a fascinating, if you're interested in Haunted Mansion history and how it ties to Disneyland as a whole, because it's not just only Haunted Mansion, because there's a lot of weird connections. But it's interesting because even though the site is specifically for Haunted Mansion, there are so many bizarre connections that it has to other attractions and aspects of the park. Like there's a subject I'm researching for a video now that has nothing to do with Haunted Mansion, but because it tied into an effect that was also used for Haunted Mansion later on, I was able to use it as a source of information.
That's like one of the weirdest things about early Imagineering, or at least that kind of like prior to Walt's death, that kind of late stage Imagineering throughout the 60s, is that like it was just these weird kind of bursts of ideas that would branch out into like 3 different attractions, and they'd all have these weird little connections in terms of like development, and even the final ride with all these Easter eggs and nods to each other. Now it feels like every attraction is just like a standalone thing. It's like, we're making this, and we made it, and now it's open, and ride it. Like back then it was just, well, we can do this, and we can do this, and well, what if we move this to that attraction? And what if we switch this effect around and we used it here? It's all just these, it was very odd, and I kind of like digging into that stuff. That's why videos like Pirates and Haunted Mansion, those are always the most fun to do, because they're so broad and there's so much stuff to get into.
Yeah, because the effect I'm talking about was the Pepper's Ghost illusion, and they were experimenting with it during the development of the castle walkthrough. And of course, they used it in the castle walkthrough, but then it also was very heavily utilized in the Haunted Mansion. And then, of course, it went on to become a huge effect that's been used a number of times throughout all kinds of attractions. I mean, look at the Omnimover vehicle system. They made it for Adventure Through Inner Space, and it worked really well. And then it evolved into being used in the Haunted Mansion.
It's used everywhere now.
Yeah, and you don't see that as much. It's usually very self-contained.
It's just a completely different way that we go at Imagineering today. Like back then, just the origin story of how Imagineering started, in terms of, it was just, it's just animators, and now you're gonna make animatronics, and we're gonna put together a ride. And it's just so kind of out there in terms of, we're just doing this weird thing. Like now it's just it's such an operation. Like, okay, you're
right.
An
That's
engineer,
a good way to phrase it. Yep.
You know how to program an animatronic based on this technology. Like, it was so experimental back then. Everything they did,
right.
It's like, I want to have this effect where there's a ghost. How are we going to do it? Oh, there's this old Pepper's Ghost effect. Let's use that. Like, it's so weird how all this stuff was thrown together and ended up creating these really interesting attractions that today we're like, oh, those are so great.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I guess it gets harder and harder as time goes on, because there's probably not all that many effects that were around in the early 1900s that can be brought in. I'm sure they've probably scraped the barrel with everything. But that's true. Like, there was more, I don't know, that's where I always get into the debate of whether it's a lack of creativity and ingenuity, or if it's just you kind of run out of, origins of effects that maybe haven't been used. Like Pepper's Ghost, that's, been around for a long time, and it hadn't been utilized that way. But I don't know if there's any others like that necessarily, that you could look at history and say, oh, maybe we could utilize this in the ride, and then create like a brand new effect that wows the world. Now it's pretty much either a screen or a projection, or, they've kind of got it all standardized.
Well, I'd say it's probably because that ties into the fact that there is no real creativity anymore. It's not like, and I get it, because there's not like, we don't have a Walt Disney who's like in charge of all of it. This is kind of his passion project. Like, I don't expect Bob Iger to be getting down and dirty with the Imagineers, putting in elbow grease, like, here's what we need to do, we're going to be doing this. It's all kind of like, nobody wants to, we're going to do this, and it's going to be really out there. Everything kind of needs to just be like, this is going to work.
Yep.
What's going to work? Okay, we have this. We have Frozen. It's a very hot IP right now. Let's make a ride on it. It's not like let's do something completely nuts. We'll make a ride about pirates. Do we have a movie to tie into this pirate concept? No, we're just going to do it because it'll be awesome. It's just like that doesn't exist anymore, and it's I kind of see it as a gross negative because creativity doesn't really exist anymore in Imagineering, and because of that, we don't see innovations. Because well, what do we need to do? We need to make an animatronic. Okay, we know how to do that. I will
Yeah.
give some credit to projected faces, though. That is kind of an innovation, but not all that impressive, guys.
It really is a very, I think the best way to describe it is like we said, it's like an operation now. It's a very structured, systematic, there's not a lot, I don't think there's as much room for experimentation um, from the, I mean, I'm not an Imagineer or anything, but I would imagine, imagine, I would think they don't have as much. I wonder if it's more if they're not given as much room to explore,
Oh, I
or if
doubt they
it's
are.
just that what I mean. Like if there's ever a time where it's let's see if there is a way to do this without whatever. If there's like a Walt Disney moment where I think they'd. I'm probably butchering the story, but with the Tiki Room, the birds. I don't think they were animatronics yet, and Walt pretty much just said, figure it out. Like figure. I forget what I don't. I forget if it was the audio aspect or what or the mechanical aspect, but one of them he just kind of had a we'll just figure it out mentality. And the guy wasn't like an engineer, but he just figured it out because there was no. I don't know. I guess now it's more about budgets and hitting the bottom line and
Yeah.
making your shareholders happy and seeing progress. And I feel like back then you could have a haunted mansion. Like, can you imagine now if they built the exterior of the whatever the Guardians of the Galaxy Epcot ride, and they completely finished the exterior, and then it just sits there for what how 8 years with no nothing being done really.
There'd be a new rumor article about it every week.
Oh
Someone has
yeah,
some leaked info about what's going on. Meanwhile, nothing's happening.
but now
Yeah.
if a structure was built and it was a complete structure, and then however many years went without any news to the public, I mean, people would be going bananas over it.
Yeah, if the haunted mansion as a concept was created, if back then they did it like how we did now, where in 1955 Walt Disney says, "I want to make a haunted house attraction." In 1956, one would have opened, and it wouldn't have been what we got. It would have been something that was cheap and thrown together, and would
Right.
have been forgotten about by 1960. That like everything just gets so rushed. Back then, you had so much wiggle room for a
Right.
kind of passion project because that's all it was. And they would have sunk millions of dollars into something like this because I want it to be this way. This is what I want to present to the world. And like that's just how
Right.
it was.
Like they would have
We
announced it. They would have like it would have been again like more of an operation. And if they had gone with Ken Anderson's original idea for the Haunted Mansion, it would have been just a totally different experience. Not necessarily bad, but it just would have not had the benefit of all the years of it evolving and changing into what it eventually became with the advancement of technology and all the things that have to do with its history.
yeah, like a walkthrough. It wasn't even like obviously it wasn't a ride until very late in the game, almost a couple years before it opened. But like I mean, they kind of had all these ideas, but they just could never flesh it out. They just didn't have the technology, or they didn't know that they could do that yet. And that's kind of eventually the ride got released, just like right when it needed to, right when it was finally perfected to a certain level. Like it wasn't hastily thrown out there because we need to. Oh well, this quarter's almost over, so that means the stockholders are going to be getting upset if we don't open this new ride and have it on time and put all the merch out. It's just like everything is just so corporatized, and I get it. Like I understand why it has to be like that, but
Right.
that's really where the root problem comes from in terms of why stuff today is so like so you can look at it so cynically because there's no real imagination or creativity coming from anything.
Right. And it's a very vicious circle because they've almost built this system that it has to operate that way.
Yeah,
With the financial aspects of the parks, and you wouldn't, it wouldn't be as simple as just saying, "Oh, we're going to let Imagineers have all the freedom they did in the old days," it wouldn't work that way because then the shareholders would be upset, and then it would have such a ripple effect that it's not as simple, as go back to the way it was.
Even Disney as a theme park, like, is completely looked at different than it was back then. Like, now it is this global phenomenon, and people know what to expect when they go there because it's been this way for so long. They know that, oh my God, I'm going to see a Disney princess at Magic Kingdom,
Yep.
and I'm going to see this and that at every other park. They know exactly what to expect. There's no room for going, we're going to get completely bonkers and just use this as whatever. Like, this whole area, this whole Disneyland is just complete experimentation of whatever I want to create from Walt's perspective. I want a haunted house. Boom, there's going to be one. I want a pirate's ride. Boom, there's going to be one. That's all that stuff. Like, now they're so limited by the fact that they need everything to kind of fit into this weird bubble of like, well, this is where you go if you want to see Disney characters, or you want to see whatever IP we bought the other day. You can just come here and check it out.
I wonder if, like, when the last real time period of that creativity, of before it became so corporatized. I mean, it's always been corporate, but when it really became that system that it is today,
I think it was. I think it was okay. The Disney company, as we knew it back like 50s, 60s when we were having all those good things. I think that kind of died over the 80s. So I think the last park where you're going to see that is Epcot and some of the later additions to Epcot throughout the late 80s. But pretty much after Eisner took over, it was very much in that vein that we have today. I of course think it's gotten worse under Iger because, he doesn't have any creativity in him. At least Eisner would do something crazy every once in a while,
Right.
and then obviously it would fail because that's just that the corporate landscape was completely different. But like I think that was the last time you were ever going to see something like that.
Well, the other thing too, and again, there's always like running jokes with Michael Eisner, and I always end up referencing him at least once in almost every video because he's so tied to so many aspects of theme park history. But
yeah.
and he did a lot of bad, he did a lot of good. It's not as black and white. But look at Alien Encounter. He was pushing. Did it work out in the end? No, because the budgets and pretty much Euro Disney is what kind of ruined Alien Encounter from being what it really could have and being rolled out the way it could have been. But before that, he was really pushing for like a really gritty alien attraction. And would that have been a good idea? Probably not. But you wouldn't see that today, is what I guess I'm trying to say. Like, you wouldn't. I can't imagine Iger like really pushing for something that Imagineers are like, oh no, that's too it's too intense, because it is very, like you said, it's almost like it has a laid out pattern that attractions have to fit into now. And whether or not Eisner's ideas would have been good as an alien shooting ride, or however it was originally going to be, he was at least pushing for something non-conventional, which is why it got so much pushback. But you wouldn't really see that determination to do something new and different, even if it isn't necessarily accepted by everyone.
That's another weird thing about the whole Eisner era and all his attractions, is that it was a very odd marriage between what we have now in terms of pure marketing and tie-ins to toys and go on this ride because you saw this movie. It was a mixture of that with the old stuff,
Right.
in terms of we're going to do something completely out there because we can. So it was like, okay, well, Alien is a hot property. What can we do with that? Let's make a cool attraction based on it. And that's like a really weird amalgamation of those two eras. And that was kind of the transitional period, the whole Eisner era between then and now.
It just became very cheap, I guess, in terms of the
Yeah.
upkeep and maintenance of the aesthetics of the parks. I think that's really what people get so upset with him about. He became very cheap. And that's not in the beginning, really. It was the opposite. But I guess at some point he just kind of turned on himself, really, and it just changed at some point.
Yeah, he continually bit off more than he could chew throughout at least the last half of his tenure at Disney. I think, and people always bring this up, the death of Frank Wells,
Right.
which was kind of chief financial officer. He really managed all this stuff. It was almost like a weird throwback to Walt, where you have a creative guy who's working on stuff like that, and you got someone who's really working out the logistics of everything in terms of finances. So it was almost like that, and then once he died and no one really took over that position, he ended up doing it. He would constantly be making all these bad bets in terms of,
Right.
well, Euro Disney, and that ended up being a failure, so that would end up mucking up the entire idea of the California Adventure and really put that in a bad spot. So all the cheapness can really be traced back to the fact that he was not good with money. He wasn't good with predicting how things were going to turn out, and that ended up with a bunch of negative results.
Yeah, because I think had he, I don't know, resigned halfway through, he would be remembered a lot differently. And there's also a ton of, stuff with his character and a lot of things he allegedly did and backstabbing.
Yeah.
That I think it's part of that too, because he, just the idea of quick and cheap was kind of that mentality that kind of plagued the parks for a long time.
Yeah, then Iger took over, and he took that same quick and cheap mentality, and he did it properly. And now look what we have.
Yeah.
For better or worse. I mean, like I said, I hate it personally the way things are being managed today, but I guarantee you there are people on the exact opposite who love it, and they look at the past and are like, ew, why did that happen? That's not good. So, I mean, pick your poison, man. How do you want to look at it? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? All I know is that it is happening. Like, this is just the way things are being run now, and probably will be run for the next 50 years. I feel pretty confident saying that. Whoever takes over for Iger will very much be in the same vein as him.
Right, and I think that's the other thing too, is now there's not as much room to bring on someone who is going to change the game. I think they really just want someone to stick with how things are going because they're going well for them financially. They don't want anyone to come in and try to do new things and try to, revolutionize attractions or what they want someone to kind of stick with the plan that they already have in motion.
Yeah. By the time something like that happens, things will have had to go so absolutely sideways for the company that they need to, like, okay, we need to just completely do a turnaround. Like, it won't be someone coming in like, yes, I'm a man of the people and I'm here to
Yeah.
fix the parks. It's gonna be, okay, we had 10 different Star Wars-esque flops in terms of franchises. Nothing is working anymore. We need to completely change the landscape of how we make our movies and how we make our theme parks. Like, that's what's really going to change things if things stop working financially, because it's just straight money now. That's all it is.
In a way, if you ask, it's not, the parks aren't built for us necessarily, the people that are really into the history of it and that, it's built for, the generation that is into Marvel and Frozen and all that. So that's another thing I think a lot of the times you have to think about is that, the average kid, teenager, whatever, probably would say, oh, I love what they're doing with the parks. I love more Marvel. I love more, really popular IP attractions. They would I doubt they would be like, I would love to see more original attractions based on how the parks were run in their early years. You're not going to get that kind of response from the average kid family nowadays, the typical demographic, I don't think. And that's obviously what they're aiming to please nowadays, which is what it's always been. We're just kind of looking at it from a different perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't say, unless you're a history buff and you really are into this stuff like we are, and I think a lot of our fans are, you wouldn't look and go, oh, we need to go back to the way it is. You just kind of look at it and you go, what's going on? Or you take it at face value and you're like, oh, this is great. Those are the two options. But I think if it just happened where things started going back to where they were originally, in terms of a new attraction that isn't based on a franchise or based on a character, if that happened and it was well executed, people wouldn't go, ew, this is terrible. I need my Avengers ride. It would just be taken at face value of, oh, this is a good attraction, just like it was back then. I'm sure there were people back then who went, why are you making a ride based on pirates? I think we need another ride based on Sleeping Beauty. I really like that character. I think we need more rides based on that. You're really mismanaging your time.
Well, I think a good example of where that can happen again is with when Magic Kingdom opened And you've probably know the story of Thunder Mesa and the Western River
Yeah.
expedition, and how it was going to be this amazing Pirates of the Caribbean-esque attraction. And the only reason, I mean, there are other factors, obviously, but the biggest reason that Thunder Mesa and the big budget attraction never came to be is because people went to Magic Kingdom, and one of the biggest complaints they got was, "Where's Pirates of the Caribbean?" That's why we never got it, is because all the priorities shifted from Thunder Mesa and all that to kind of getting a Pirates of the Caribbean attraction ASAP. So I wonder if that would happen if they tried to do another original ride, and then maybe the generation will come in and say, "Well, where's Marvel? Where's Guardians of the Galaxy?" And then they would scrap the original ride to make Marvel or whatever, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're right. That's a pretty good point, man. I didn't even think of it like that because, yeah, that is pretty much exactly what happened. It's probably one of the first examples of Disney being known for something and then doing something else, like they were trying to do something
Right.
back then. But I think the real issue with that and how it could be different is the fact that it was at Magic Kingdom, which was basically like, Disneyland East. It's its own. It's like they wanted the exact same thing, just over there, so that way people who lived on the East Coast could kind of do that thing. The real chance they had to kind of do something different was with Epcot, because that had never been done ever before. So you could really just kind of experiment. You could do exactly what was in the vein of what that park was supposed to be, experimental. And then the people wouldn't go, "Oh, how come
Right.
is it like this?" Because, well, too bad. It's its own thing. Either you like it or you don't, and that's it.
Right, because it was an East Coast version of Disneyland in a way. You could look at it that way. And then just because they didn't have pirates and people wanted Pirates of the Caribbean, they totally shifted all their. And, they didn't cancel it outright, but they really did put it on the back burner. And then it just, with Thunder Mountain, that kind of killed it. But it would have been a pretty incredible attraction. And then that could have maybe spawned a franchise of its own. But we'll never know, because it wasn't, the Western River expedition was never built. What makes me the most upset is that that's why the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction in Magic Kingdom is like a Quick Notes version or a Spark
Oh
Notes
yeah,
version. It's just like it's like half an attraction. Is
it's
because
terrible.
they were like, okay, we'll build Pirates really quick, but we're still going to do Western River Expedition, and they planned on including a lot of elements of Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean into the Western River Expedition. There were, if you go through like the layout of the ride and the story of the ride, it was going to have a lot of aspects of Pirates of the Caribbean, but in terms of westerns, it would have had
Yeah, under a new theme.
it would have had the caverns, and it would have had a really climactic ending and but of course Thunder Mesa ended up getting scrapped. So then that's why we only have like half of Pirates of the Caribbean here.
Yeah, and it's so bad because like I was working on a video for what the differences were between the two different pirates, and like that, just one difference of leaving off the first like half of that ride, I mean that shaves off half the time. Like Pirates over in Disneyland is like one of the longest rides they have. It's basically like their Splash Mountain.
Yeah.
It's just this very long kind of, you get what you pay for in terms of waiting, and it's just like completely cut in half in this very, and it's not done any better. I think it's worse because of it. And it's not like they decided, "Oh, hey, we'll get rid of this whole first half, but we'll make the battle scene 10 times
Right.
bigger and we'll add more stuff to it." It's just this very condensed, not as good version.
Yeah, they wanted to get one up as quick as possible, and that's kind of how things are now, it seems. Because with the Pirates at Disneyland, I love how it's just such a complete experience, going from when you enter the building and then you're on the Blue Bayou, and just that whole first chunk sets up the rest of the ride. Excuse me. It sets up the rest of the ride so amazingly well as this whole experience, as like a journey, whereas the Magic Kingdom version is just kind of the summarization of it. It doesn't
Yeah.
have that. You don't feel like you've been on a journey, whereas Pirates at Disneyland, I do. I feel like I've been on, I've had a really immersive experience. And then here, I still enjoy it, of course, because it's Pirates of the Caribbean, but I don't have that complete immersion as I do as the other one.
They kind of box themselves in with with a lot of that stuff. It's like here's what Disney World is. Here's what Disney as like a kind of a company is, and we really can't do much with that. We're kind of stuck, which I'm sure they're fine with because they're in a pit, but it's a pit that makes them money, so
Yeah.
they don't necessarily care. It isn't until like things start becoming or stop becoming profitable that's when they're going to be like, we need to go
Right.
somewhere else.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that's very true that until they hit a period where the attractions aren't working, people stop coming to the parks or whatever, that's the only way that any real shift would happen. And again, I try to look at it from the average, what the demographic is they're aiming for, because they're not meant for us, unfortunately, as much as I think we like to think they
We
they are
are a
sometimes.
minority.
Yep, and you know, um, that's how that is. But anyways, it's probably as good a time of any to wrap things up.
On a nice depressing note about how
A
the
nice
company is going to be stuck.
nice gloomy way to end this one. But I mean, I think they'll have because I agree that Epcot was like their chance to, because it wasn't like a Disneyland, another version of that. It was like a whole new park with a whole new idea and a whole new um, like goal, I guess. So maybe that would be the only way we would see something different that would allow them to do that. To have more risk or to be able to take more risks in trying something new rather than making just a bunch of IP based rides.
Yeah, but I mean, you just really need to look at Epcot as it stands today to know that that's totally not what's going to happen. Like they could have easily had their second chance with that
Right.
park again in the recent, the recent era by saying, okay, we're going to bring Epcot back to more what it was because it kind of fell off. Throughout the '90s, they started adding more characters throughout it, which is completely the antithesis of what that park was. It was like the non-character park. They didn't exist at all.
Right.
And so they very easily could have brought it back. Like, oh, we're getting to what are we at? Like 35th anniversary of Epcot. We're going to start bringing it back, and there's going to be these, maybe not those same types of ride systems because Omni movers are boring, but more history based and
Yeah.
more focusing on the future. And then they say we're going to do Guardians, and I go, okay, well that's in the ground, that idea.
Yeah, for me, like, I do enjoy Frozen, the ride. I do enjoy it. I'm not a huge fan of the movie, but I enjoy the ride for what it is. But I think that was kind of one of the first steps that kind of solidified Epcot's fate as just being very IP based and taking what was originally, again, just exploring the Norwegian culture and myths and legends and making it into an IP based ride. I think for whatever reason for me that was like the writing on the wall, like, okay, this is how things are going to go from now on. We're going to lose these experiences because, and it makes sense from a business point of view, but because I love Maelstrom, but and again, not to end it on a downer note.
Hey, okay. I'm sure Guardians will be boatloads of fun, man. But like in
True.
terms of theming, like okay, Epcot as a park is now just like the California Adventure. It is a variety park. Everything we can't fit into any of the other parks because it doesn't mesh well with their theming, put it in Epcot because why not? Like that. That's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And that's kind of how I look at it. And that's kind of how I excuse the fact that I go on Frozen every time I'm at Epcot because I mean, I hate myself for doing it, but I gotta because I love Frozen.
That is true, though. I hadn't thought of that. That it's kind of become the it doesn't quite fit here. It doesn't quite fit here. Oh, let's just throw it in. Does it have to do with space or kind of sci-fi? Okay, put it in Future World. Does it kind of have to do with like fantasy? Well, we can kind of tie it to Norway, so we'll put Frozen in here. Ratatouille, it takes place in Paris. We'll put it in there, So it ties in well. Now, the Ratatouille one, I'm actually really looking forward to it because it's not replacing something. It's a brand new ride. I mean, maybe they may have to get rid of one of the restaurants or shops or something, but
Nah, that's fine.
it's not. That's why that one I'm more optimistic about because it's just a brand new experience and we're not losing anything because of it.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I think I was on Kevin's podcast when I said, because this was like right when all these changes were getting thrown out and people were talking about all these new attractions that were coming to Epcot. I'm like, if that's the way that it's going to have to go down, where we get more World Showcase rides, they have to be tied into whatever kind of Disney IP they have that loosely connects to that, because they have quite a lot of cultural IPs
Right.
that I didn't quite realize until then. Like, if that's the way it's going to have to be to get rides that we wouldn't otherwise get, so be it. Because like all the rides that were going to be in those pavilions, there were quite a few. Like Germany was going to
Right.
get one, all those, and they just never came to fruition. Like I didn't expect those to come back anytime recently, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes, and I'm all fine for it.
They
But
could, in
like I
theory,
said,
they could at some point have a ride for every pavilion. Because, yeah, Germany was going to have a ride and Japan was going to have Meet the World and China. Like, there were so many attractions and then so many, two of them that were even partially built, but then it kind of went south. But I guess that's the best way to look at it is like if they're going to be adding more IP stuff, do it over, at the showcase because there's so much to work with, even if you have to kind of loosely tie it in. For me, it was just the maelstrom. But again, I understood from a business
it
perspective.
still
And
hurts.
I know I love that ride, but I am looking forward to Ratatouille. And I also do think, maybe it's a blasphemy, but that I would not mind seeing a Coco-based attraction in the Mexico Pavilion to replace the three caballeros. I can never say it. I can never say
Caballeros,
that right.
that one's
That I would be
yeah,
fine
that
with.
one's
I'd be
that's okay, because that one already got trashed. That one already got through Caballero, so you might as well just change it again to something even better. The only thing that gets me concerned is the logistics of how they would even do that, because like you basically need to turn the whole pavilion into a queue. I mean, we saw it happen with Frozen. Like the entire post-show
true.
Maelstrom,
Yeah.
the theater, all that needed to be turned into a queue just to accommodate for the massive amount of crowd. Like, so you'd basically lose Mexico as a
I hadn't
pavilion.
thought of
That whole
that.
thing would just be a ride. Like that
That
building,
is
that's
true.
a
I hadn't
ride
thought of
now.
that like at all, but that is so true because the queue is so tiny and it's meant for a small, kind of. It's not meant for a Frozen, you know. And even Frozen,
Yeah,
whenever I'm in that queue, it's so claustrophobic and it's so tight. I've never. I like it when you go through the cabin, but for the most part, it's very. You're just in a room,
yeah, some
weaving. Yeah.
switchbacks.
So that's I hadn't thought of that, but that is I don't know what they unless they could somehow expand it outward. I'm not sure if there's any space to do that, but maybe they could do something.
Not not in terms of the walkway, but there might possibly be a little bit of space over to like the left of that building when you're looking into it, because like when you're on test track, you can kind of look down and you can see the show
Hmm.
building, and then you look down. There's a little bit of empty space, but they would need to like blow out a hole in the actual building and then kind of put it behind where that new bar is. They put a new
Yeah.
bar in last year. Like there's some room there, but like, and you also have to wonder, was Coco really that big? Is it really that big now?
Mm,
Like what's
true.
what's the gain? So
Yeah. Well, they could always close the crystal shop or whatever it is that's right next to it and get a little bit more queue space. But
yeah,
no, I see what you mean because Frozen. There's another one coming out. Wreck-It Ralph. I don't know if that's still going to happen, but there's another one coming out. Whereas Coco probably won't have a sequel. But then again, Ratatouille won't. I don't think is having a sequel.
but that one is like it's like iconic at this point almost. Like that's a very well
Right.
received. It's so old that it's like okay, it stands on its own. Coco's in this weird kind of gray area.
They'd have
So
to wait a
if it
while, I guess.
happens, yeah, if it happens, it won't happen in terms of like a oh we got to get it out real quick.
True.
So that might be conducive to a better ride instead of just a dumb overlay, which probably would have happened had they rushed it
Right.
out. If they just threw it out there like Coco's popular, we gotta capitalize. Boom. Now it's Grand Fiesta Tour, but now with some characters you recognize like Frozen.
Yeah, because it is kind of funny because I think the director Leon Critch said that he came up with the idea for Coco while riding uh, the ride and being in the Mexico Pavilion. So it'd be kind of fun to see it come full circle. But I agree. I'd rather see like a full fledged attraction rather than just sticking a few characters in there. But either way, Hey, I guess we got around to ending it on a positive note after all.
Epcot is dead. Now it's not. It's negative
How
again.
dare you? Anyways, well, thanks for coming on. It was fun. I always love talking theme parks with you and everyone else, and I wanted to dig a little into the Haunted Mansion discussion a little bit more than we had. So why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where they can watch your stuff, and if you want to plug any or talk about anything you're working on now that you'll have out, or
All right, you guys can find me on YouTube / Park Ride History. I've also got a Twitter, somewhat active on that. Currently on YouTube, got a running series that might be over by the time this is posted. I don't know. Spooktober 2018 going strong. One last video on the Phantom Manor coming out by the end of the month. So look forward to that. It's going to be nice and spooky. A nice positive note to wrap up pretty much the entirety of the Haunted Mansion. I've covered most of the Haunted Mansion and mansions around the world at this point. So that's like the it's like the closing statement on the Haunted Mansion for my channel. So should be fun.
yeah, I would love to ride Phantom Manor. From what I've seen, it looks just
Oh, it's
incredible.
nice.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening and slash or watching if you're on YouTube. And I'll see you all next time on Yesterworld.